and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Sheen, your host, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. One question I get asked all the time, and one question I ask all the time, is about what do I do with my money? Investing has become part of our language all the time, so it's time to learn a little bit more about it. And we have a special guest with us today who's here to tell us a little bit more about how to invest, what is the best way to invest, and also if you're new to investment, hopefully this will be the only episode you ever need to watch in your life. So please join me in welcoming Mohammed Raafi, who is the co-founder and CEO of Fasset. You've also held a lot of interesting positions, which I will let you introduce yourself in a bit, but please join me in welcoming him. Hi Raafi, how are you?
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So Raafi, tell us, the journey has been great from Harvard, Berkeley, and then you went into different organizations. You work for the government, for the Prime Minister's office in the UAE, for the UN. So tell us, what has that journey been like?
It's been all sorts of different things. I've now kind of lived and done work in 6 continents around the world. So I've spent some time, in Australia, in South America, families kind of between Asia, Europe, and America. So it's been interesting. I actually started my career not knowing that I'm starting my career. I had an internship in the middle of my master's program in Jordan, and 3 months went to 6 months, 6 months went to 9 months. The Arab Spring came about, and my boss at the UN was like, Raafi, just stay on. So I actually never returned to Harvard. I just continued going all around the Middle East at that point in time, and that kind of shaped how my career went along. It wasn't part of the plan, but I just never went back.
You never did?
I never went back. I've
do
been in the
you
region ever
want
since. To be honest, this summer, after about 4 years, I went back to my hometown in LA, and the weather's very nice. The culture is what I'm used to, but the action is out here in the Middle East, in the global South, and that kind of excitement you just can't get. LA is now a corner of the world, which is something that growing up I would have never imagined myself saying.
But are you not tempted to wrap up the Harvard part?
To be honest, I think there's enough luminaries who've never wrapped it up. I'm just kidding. But someday. And I think, when I go back, it'll be with a perspective that was very different than when I left. And I'm really excited to kind of explore that at that point in time. But right now, just, in the middle of building and just kind of learning from the people that we work with kind of all over the world.
I'm going to take a little tangent here, which was not planned, but because I feel like it's really important that you've recognized that if you were to go back to Harvard at this point, it will just be for the prestige and for getting a piece of paper. And you're already learning from your real life examples. So what advice do you have for people? Because, there's this big discussion now, which is about the future of education. And I always say it, and I feel like a hypocrite for saying this, because obviously I went to Oxford, I went to Cambridge, I did a terminal degree, I have a PhD, and now I say I don't really see the point of education. So it sounds like it's easy for me to say that because I've done it, but given that you actually left it, what advice do you have for people who feel like sometimes not having the right education or the right institution can hold them back?
It's actually a great question. And it's a super relevant question for the era of AI that we're living in right now, because the reality is anyone can learn anything. Jobs are changing. I wouldn't say that they're disappearing, but the nature of work is changing faster than the education system. So that means, when you think about a university, for me, a university has 2 utilities, right, that don't really complement each other. So you have to kind of pick one, in my opinion. One is networking, right? So ideally you want to go to a university, yes, for the degree, for some basic skills, but that, broadly speaking, is going to be the same no matter where you go. But definitely, whether it's right or wrong, elite universities, as you know, come with an elite network. And that network is your leverage when you start your career, because everyone will put in the same effort, but the person with the network, you know what they say, network is your net worth. Well, obviously, so when you're putting that same effort, if you have your network to your advantage, for every 1 unit of work you're doing, you're getting 10 units of output due to your network, which is a reality of privilege, because going to an elite university is not always about your academic capabilities, right? As we know. So that's one reason to go to university. Second reason would be to kind of explore something that you're passionate about. And I think in this era, not enough people go to university with that in mind because of natural pressures. I got to get a job. I have to make a living. But I think, running a startup like I do, the people that I like to hire, doesn't really matter what university they go to. Yes, it's a component. So if I see someone who went to a great university, I take a little bit from, okay, they must have worked hard to get there. But really, you want to hire someone who's hungry, who's willing to learn things that are unknown, and who is curious enough to go out there and get it done. And that doesn't really matter if you have that degree or not in the grand scheme of things, right? So for me, if I'm going back, let's say to Harvard, I'm going back because there's a void that I picked up in my experience in kind of in work that I want to go and really double click on. And I want to kind of sit back with intellectuals, with professors, with PhDs, with academics and say, hey, this is what I've seen. I want to unpack this. I want to get to the bottom of it. And definitely, a place like Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, you're talking to, the minds of their fields. And for me, one of my kind of mentors gave me this great line. He's like, miracles happen at the intersection of sectors. So, when we're out here in the global south, in my case, solving finance with democratization, with politics, we're at the intersection of many different things. And being able to kind of take some of those, let's say parallels that are now perpendiculars back to a place like Harvard and bring those experiences to someone who's been kind of reading the history of the world in that field is very powerful, right? And so I definitely go back, but not anytime soon.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
So you would send your kids to university?
So if I send my kids to university, I've made it very clear, you have to go to university where you can network. It's not for, in this time and age, it's not because, my daughters can study whatever they like, but it's really taking what you're studying, being passionate about it, finding people who are extremely passionate about it with yourself, and then having the means to do something at a massive scale. Because that's something that today's world you can do. One person can change a narrative in any field, in any subject, as we've seen.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And I think that's one thing, because I get asked all the time, how did you leave behind? Because I did very sciencey stuff at university. I have a PhD in spinal research.
No way. Okay.
And obviously now I do this. And a lot of times they say, don't you feel like you've wasted all of those years of education? But honestly, the best thing I took away from university was my network. Even till date, the people that I have connected to, incredible, right? You have access to
Absolutely.
almost every industry that you want. And there's someone there.
And the first principles of getting to the bottom of your field, right? That applies to everything.
Yeah.
That same rigor probably applies to, content creation, podcasting. And I think, looking back at my university time, one thing that I may not remember most of what I studied, but I do remember the hard work I put in.
Exactly.
So when a challenge comes today, you can kind of pull back saying, I pulled through back then. I can still, I'm sure that's the same for you.
Yeah, 100%, all the time. You feel like if I live through that,
exactly,
this is
exactly,
nothing.
exactly.
But going back to the company, I like what you mentioned about, now that you're hiring for your own company, what you look for, and it's really important for us to move with the things that are happening around us in the world. But tell us a little bit about Fasset. How did the idea come to you, and what is your vision with Fasset?
Yeah, Fasset is a all-in-one financial app. You can consider it like a bank. But the difference is that we want to enable our user base coming from the global south to think about investing the hard money that they're earning. And if you think about banking today and banking historically, especially coming from, let's say, Western civilization, it's always been about debt. Banks want to put you in debt. You can have even Islamic banks here call you here in UAE, and the first thing they'll say is, sign up for a credit card. Take a personal loan.
Yeah,
but
it's Sharia compliant.
Even though Sharia compliant. But do they ever say, hey, Sheen, if you have $100 to spare, think about putting it in gold. Think about this, property opportunity. But that's what banks should do, right? Because, the world we live in, unfortunately, the financial system that we see that kind of inspired us to start Fasset is someone has to lose for you to gain. But in this world of abundance that we live in today, everything is abundantly available, but wealth is not equally shared. So in this era of abundance, if done right, everyone can have a fair share, meaning that for you to win, someone else can win too. And I think it's with that spirit that we've started Facet, that you can have a singular bank-like experience in our markets, what we call Morocco, all the way to Malaysia. That inspires you, that enables you, that empowers you to build an asset base to your name. And if you think about bank-like platforms in any country that you lived in, if you've been in the UK, you had a bank app there.
Yeah.
You come to the UAE, you have a bank app here. You might be from a third country, you have a bank app there. If you move from one country to another, you need to close your bank account. But we live in an era like, if you can use Instagram and Facebook everywhere, why not keep your finances in one app? And I think with the technology we have today, with the blockchain, for Facet, it's one experience. It's your assets under your name, and it follows you wherever you go.
Okay. Now, my first question is, because I've also worked a lot with people from what we call the global south. Do you feel like the resistance that you will get is that people don't even have money, let alone money to invest? So how do you change that mindset?
Well, to be honest, I would tell you that the middle class in the global south has been increasing at an insane rate over the last 15, 20 years. If you're from a country like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nigeria, you'll notice, 30 years ago, no one used to eat out in these countries, right? You would eat at home with your family. Now you go there, people are eating out, people are buying stuff on Amazon. So the wealth has definitely increased, but the mindset has not evolved, right? And I think one of the things that we like to do is say, hey, you have that disposable income, no matter how small it is, build a base and start early. Otherwise, what happens is that, the members, the constituents of the global south, intergenerationally fall behind their counterparts in the West. And that's a shame.
Yeah, and there is so much to catch up on anyway, based on history, what happened to us, right?
Yep,
We're always catching up.
Absolutely.
But this is so funny because you just reminded me of something. So I was in Kenya during summer. We went to the Masai Mara. And you have those original Maasai villages where they're not even educated. They don't have electricity, nothing. But they get so much money from tourists that come and just pay to enter the village. And I was curious. I just asked the chief of the village, what do you do with all the money? Because clearly it's not being kind of like put back into the village. He was like, we own land in Nairobi. So the capital of Kenya is where they own land, and that's
Incredible.
basically fructifying their money for them, for the next generations. And I was like, they have the knowledge and they have thought, let's think ahead. Let's not splurge the money now. We're going to make it work for us. And you're so right. It's just a question of changing that mindset and that narrative so that even we can start building wealth for the future generations. But now my other questions for you is, I feel like when we're talking about mindset, another mindset that a lot of people have is, I want to save my money. I think when it comes to saving, we are there already. Everyone knows it's important to save. But we all love to see that money in our account, right? We like to see it pile up. Even for me, I remember when I started working, I love seeing the numbers grow in your savings account. And then it's really hard to believe that you need to take that money out and put it somewhere else. And that's because we still haven't accepted the fact that that money is depreciating over time. Even if the numbers are increasing, it's depreciating and it's not doing anything for you. So what would you say is the difference between investing and saving?
It's a great point. And I'll be very honest. I grew up with that same mindset as well. So, it wasn't until there was a wait list that came out for the very famous app called Robinhood in America where I thought, you know what? Stocks are not just what my dad does by calling a broker in the 90s. It's something that I can kind of dabble with as well. So this is a recent phenomenon, even in the West. Now, what's interesting about savings is that savings, you're absolutely right, has been part of our cultures for a long time. And interestingly, it's been part of the culture of women in our areas as well. So if you think about committee, if you think about kitty parties, this idea of that, informal groups of women come together and they save together is something that's been around for generations. But that transition from, hey, you have this in cash to putting it into an investment, there's a little bit of that. So if you think about it, when it comes to like weddings in our culture, one of the things that people ask is, do you own any property? So buying a house, there is a little bit of a mindset there that, you want to kind of put something in an asset that stands the test of time. But the idea that there are other asset classes that exist, we haven't graduated to that point yet. And part of that is access, because in many of these countries that we operate in, you don't have access, right? So if you don't have access, why would you learn about it? But part of that is just the mindset that, you know what, especially in this era where buying a house is getting almost impossible, we must keep our money in some sort of investment. And also understanding that given, what happened during COVID, 2021, 2008, that money is not like it used to be. Before, 50 rupees would get you, a semester in a great school, right? Now 50 rupees doesn't get you anything, right? So if you're keeping your money in rupees, good luck to you, right? So I think but that change is going to come from movements. It's going to come from education, but primarily it's going to come from things from tech. So if you think about how the culture has changed of even aunties, grandmothers using social media, definitely if there's access, there will be people who come out and learn and start investing.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned about women have always been trained to that. I'm going to add to that because I feel like the way women are taught about money is very different to the way men are. We are always told to find the best bargain, to, save money and budget. And in the US especially, you have coupons that people will collect. And it's always women who focus on that part. So there's never make your money work for you. There's always save your money. That's why I was saying that I feel like the savings part, we have ingrained that in
100%.
people. But when it comes to men, the way they are taught about money is very much make it work for you, grow your wealth, invest your money. And even now, I think I was reading the statistics before the podcast where it says that women hold, I think, 61% of their wealth in cash, but men, 71%.
No way.
Women literally hold 71% of their wealth in cash, but men only 60% because there's a reluctance now to invest. And I think it comes mostly from not knowing, right? So how do we change that?
I think in terms of changing that, it's just, there has to be a consolidated effort from a cultural standpoint. There has to be encouragement from other quarters. This is where, both women and men are involved. That, hey, if I'm raising daughters, I'm telling them, hey, you need to build an asset base from day one, right? You need your own financial security moving forward in this era that we live in. And if you're a woman, there's definitely a need for just getting educated, kind of taking control, which is kind of the era we live in, right? And understanding that there's opportunities. For companies like ourselves is to make sure that we cater to both and we get feedback from female customers as well as male customers. We understand the nuances, the differences, but historically women are better investors than men. You're right, women do save better than men. The only thing is education and access, right? If these two things change, it's a quick change overnight.
And this is for women, but there's also now the younger group of the new generation coming up. And I feel like one thing they don't understand is that assets over accessories, they're always focused on looking rich rather than actually being rich. And that's where it becomes an issue because they don't know how to save their money to then have money to invest and make their money grow for them. So I'll give you an example. We're in Dubai. A lot of my friends who come here to work have really high salaries and they do it for like 5 years or something. Then they leave Dubai to go back to where they came from with no savings.
No way.
Because they're living their best lives in Dubai. And there's that mentality of, YOLO, we are only young ones as well. So let's just do the best. But how do we change that mindset of showing them that, if you start now, isn't the saying that you should have started investing yesterday anyway? So how do we change that mindset?
I would say just starting early and starting small. Just building the habit. It's just like anything else. When you go to the gym, you don't start lifting 100 kg overnight. You just start really small. And the great thing about kind of the era of fintech and financial inclusion that we live in today is that you can start literally with 10 dirhams, right? And I think everyone can say, instead of having a coffee today, I can put this behind some sort of asset, and just building that habit, building that investing muscle. It's very similar to social media, actually, I would say, because when you see, okay, my 10 dirhams that I chose instead of Starbucks last month is now 13, is a natural human inclination to say, you know what, why didn't I just put 100? And then all of a sudden, there's less bags and shoes, and there's more assets in the app.
Yeah, but do you think it's of course we discussed the whole access and education, but I think there's also fear around it, right? Fear about putting your money away. What if you lose that money? So how safe is it to invest?
It's a great question, and it's at the mathematical level, it's like what is your risk in return? But at some level, it's about for example, if you're coming from a global south country, one thing you learn immediately when you come to UAE and deal in dirhams is that, wait a minute, I should keep all my money in dirhams versus whatever currency I came from, right? And that's a small shift in mindset, saying that had I not come here, I wouldn't realize that just keeping my money in AED. Now, no one will tell you, of someone who's moved here, that I should keep my money back in my currency back home. No one's going to say that now,
No.
right? I don't care who you are, right? So that education is just from experience. And I think similar things like gold. Gold has been part of our cultures, in our markets from Morocco to Malaysia for generations. Similar to buying a house, women fundamentally gain their financial security at a time of wedding or inheritance in gold, right? So there's a couple of these things that have predated kind of our generation that we just need to modernize. So instead of having physical gold, you can buy digital gold, right? Instead of keeping cash in your cupboard, you can keep dollars and dirhams in your bank app, as an example. And then kind of graduating from there, saying that, okay, if I have 70% of my holdings in dirhams versus my local currency back home, how about I take a little bit of risk and put something in Apple or in Google? And these companies have been around. I use them every day. So kind of just graduating from there and saying, okay, I've done that now for 2-3 years. Why don't I take a risk on Bitcoin for 2% of my holdings? And kind of experience is a life's best teacher. So people should lose a little bit so they understand, and people should gain a little bit so they keep building that muscle.
Yeah. No, I like what you said, that you can start very small. But I guess the next obvious question is, practically, what would you say is the first step for someone who has recognized that they have some extra cash, they want to invest it, and they know that, okay, I might be interested in some digital assets of some sort, but what would you say is the first step to do that?
First step is find a platform that is easy and intuitive for yourself. Something that one feels comfortable with, that they can see there's a level of trust with, a company that has a standing, that has a track record, and say, you know what, let me open that app. Let me put that app on the real estate of my phone's home screen, and just see it there for a few weeks, and then kind of click there and just, dabble in it. I think just like anything else, the first step, you take that, you put that 10 dirhams in there, you see it grow, and everything comes naturally from there.
Is there a lot of kind of like admin to get started on any of these platforms that puts people off?
It's easier than ever before.
Okay.
I would say, if you've ever tried to open a bank account in the UK or UAE or America, it's nothing like that anymore. You just download the app, you put your face into the camera, and you're good to go.
Yeah. Okay. So
there's no bank branches that you need to go to. There's no paper signing.
Yeah.
So it's the easiest it's ever been.
So now you've said that Fasset has been in business for around 5 years, right? So have you seen any changes in the way people approach investing?
Definitely. I would say in our markets, in the global south, there's been more interest in investing than ever before, and it's night and day.
Oh, wow.
And it's night and day. Why? It's because of the failure of their local currencies. So we haven't seen this level of devaluation of many of these countries' currencies in the history of these currencies. So, people in a country like Pakistan have lost their net worth by 30% in a span of 6 months, let's say a couple of years ago. That's just by doing nothing, just keeping their money in the bank that they've been taught to do, but the rupee devalued against the dollar. And, you might be holding the same number that you see on the screen, but it's worth 30% less. And what does that force people to do? It forces them to say, you know what, I'm getting 30% less for my purchases. I need to think about how to hedge, right? So now these terms start coming into the parlance of the average person. I need to start moving into dollars. I need to move into hard assets like gold. I need to think about real estate. So you've seen all these kind of real estate apps here in Dubai. Everyone wants to get a piece of that. So I think it's the problems that the world is facing that have kind of pushed people into thinking about it for the first time.
But you see, again, I feel like the problem we have now as well is people are overwhelmed with information.
True.
There's so many things that you could be doing. As you said, even the real estate now, you could start with 200 dirhams apparently to own part of a house. So it's when you're faced with this barrage of information and you're not someone who comes from a financial background, how do you filter through all of that to decide how to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a little bit of curiosity. It's going to take a little bit of effort. One of our belief systems when it comes to how the financial system should be is that there has to be some level. This is just a basic principle of the way we believe ethical finance should be, is that there should be some level of work for return. And what does that mean? A lot of rich people are guaranteed returns when they put their money with the Goldman Sachs and JP Morgans. But our belief is that you got to do a little bit of work to be able to get that 10% on your money. And similar to that, if you want to kind of dive through this overwhelming amount of information, which I totally agree with, you're going to have to park a little bit aside, find some time, do some research. But is it worth your time? Absolutely. Because we now live in an era, if you don't do nothing, you're not staying stagnant. You're actually losing your money, right? So it's imperative that you do something just to stay in the same place. So if you want to stay in the same place, you still have to work.
Yeah, and I like that you've touched upon ethical investing, and there's also impact funds, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about these?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I think let me break down what I mean by ethical, right? Fasset, we take a lot of cues on how the financial system should be from kind of our heritage, from an Islamic finance perspective, from a kind of a base layer principles of Sharia perspective, which I think applies to everybody, and really boils down to three aspects. That money cannot beget money. So if I put $100, I shouldn't just be getting $10 if nothing has happened, right? There had to have been something. Someone should have benefited somewhere for that $10 to come out of that $100. And that's just the basis of everything. That if a human being isn't being benefited somewhere, there's no economic value created, right? Because ultimately, what are you willing to pay for? You pay for that coffee in the morning because it makes you feel better, right? You pay for Salik because easier to take Sheikh Zayed from point A to point B than Emirates Road. So you pay for value. So if someone is getting a return on their money, they had to have put it somewhere in the real world, which sounds like common sense, but the majority of the financial system just prints money out of thin air, right? Second thing is that, if I am going to take a risk, the other party in my transaction should be taking a risk too. So, a basic example of this is that if a wealthy person gives me $1,000 and demands that in a month I got to pay $100 back, that wealthy person is not taking a risk, right? So I got to find a way to generate that extra $100 over that month span. I got to work 16 hours at a restaurant and, be a waiter somewhere and collect tips, but that wealthy person doesn't have to because they're guaranteed to get their $100 back. That's not the way ethical finance works, right? Both parties must assume some level of risk for their return. And then the third thing is that there should be clarity on any transaction. It can't be like, hey, I'm giving you $1,000. If something happens, if the U.S. president is X, you need to give me Y back, right? And there's a lot of that, right? Because that's called gambling at the end of the day. So I think these are basic principles that if we just applied, it goes back to what I said earlier, that for you to win, I can win too. But a lot of finance today is that you need to lose for me to gain. And who does that best is the elite and the wealthy, right? And that's not fair. So we really hold firm to that, where the assets and the products that we put out there at Fasset, we want to make sure that it's driving value in society. And because it's driving value in society, you're winning too.
That's amazing. That does make it, like, it makes you feel good as well.
Absolutely.
From putting your money away.
Absolutely.
So that's amazing. But how do you see this evolving? Not just Fasset, but the industry as well. How do you see it evolving in the next few years?
I think one thing for sure, singular experience. You should, if the world is more mobile than ever before, you could be from one country but living in a second country, and your parents could be in a third country, and you're commuting to a fourth country, right? Why do I need 4 apps? You don't download Instagram in every country that you go to, right? How would that be, right? So financial access should be universal. It should be the same for everybody. Someone in Bangladesh shouldn't not be able to. They can buy Apple They can buy an Apple MacBook, but they can't buy Apple stock, even though they're contributing to the success of Apple. That's not fair, right? So I think as we move forward, we'll get that same type of singular experience that we're seeing in other sectors, like social media, like healthcare, like AI. And I think finance is one of the last areas where it's still siloed by countries, which inherently doesn't benefit the majority of the world.
And we're just going to get onto the topic because you said that Fasset is basically based on blockchain, right? So will you please explain to the audience, not me obviously because I know everything about blockchain, but tell us a little bit about blockchain, like you're speaking to you.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I think blockchain is part of what we call now Web3. So for there to be a Web3, there was a Web 1 and a Web 2. So if you remember when the internet first came out, all you could really do is read stuff on the internet. I don't know if you remember this.
I do.
Right? You would go to, certain websites and you can find a recipe, but you can't tell the person who wrote that recipe that your recipe sucks, right? There's no way to do that. You can just, you try it out. It doesn't work. There's no reviews. There's no way to comment. That was an era of the internet, and that was Web 1, where you can only read. Right.
So no haters back then.
No haters back then.
I miss it.
But no reviews back then either. You know what I mean? Web 2 was where you could write for the first time. So that recipe was terrible. You and a bunch of trolls from the internet can be like, hey, you're not a chef, right? Your recipe is terrible. I have a better one. Here's my video, right? So that's Web 2, right? So you can read and you can write and you can have communication. Web 3, there's just one word. You can own. Right? Do you own your followers on Instagram? Do you own your subscribers on YouTube? You don't own it.
No, the platform can go away.
Yeah, if you say a few things on a particular issue, you're gone. Right? So Web3 ensures that whatever you've done with your hard work, you can own it, and it's primarily due to this technology called blockchain, right? Where blockchain isn't owned by anybody, but everybody owns it, right? So there's a bunch of computers out there that all say, if Sheen has 100,000 followers, it's hers. So if one of those computers say no, well, there's 999,000 other computers that say yes, and therefore it's yours. And I think the example I like to give is the Quran, right? This is how it's been preserved. It's basically human blockchain, where no one's been able to change the word because there's too many people who have memorized it, and they would automatically catch you, right? If you try to change it or you try to print it. So blockchain is kind of the technological version of that. And what it does is that because no one owns it, but everyone participates in it, you can verify that something is yours independently of anybody. And in the era that we live in, that's extremely important. Now, you take the example of, certain things that are happening around the world. People are putting like asterisks in the middle of Palestine. People are putting, emojis because they're afraid of the algorithm. So you don't own anything, right? But why can't we speak freely to the extent where whatever I'm saying and the value that I'm creating is mine, right? And that's what blockchain does. And our example of that is, how do we bring some of these assets that, your banking system wouldn't allow you to do? So if you take a country like Pakistan, I can't send money out of the country, right? But the rich guy in the country can bring Toyotas, Apple laptops. How does he do that? He sends money out of the country. He brings it back. He charges you, and you buy it. But if I now want to invest in Apple because I've bought 5 iPhones over the last 5 years, I can't do it, right? Because the banking system doesn't allow you to. So who takes the upside of 230 million Pakistanis purchasing Apple goods? It's the people who have access, and Pakistanis are not amongst them. So blockchain is a system, it's a rail, it's a highway that enables us to kind of move value independent of a third party to get whatever you own into your hands and into your hands solely, which is a very powerful concept that we're just at the beginning of. But I'm sure people can kind of imagine what that kind of world looks like.
Yeah, that potential is limitless, right?
Yep.
But is there any downside?
Look, I mean, governments would tell you that the downside is lack of control. Can you have nefarious activities happening on a rail like this? Absolutely, right? But that's no different than any technology, right? And whenever human beings are involved, guardrails are a must. So, there are two extremes on this. One is that we can't give any freedom from technology to humans, and we can give and some people say we only want freedom. But the reality in anything in life is that some guardrails are important to ensure that this technology is used for good, and it's no different to anything else. And we believe in that.
And do you think there's a need for proper legislation and policies around
Absolutely.
it?
Absolutely.
Are we still behind on that?
We're still behind, but I think at the end of the day, governments are run by people. So our conversations in the global south have always been, yes, you banned crypto because of, abhorrent levels of speculation. But is it fair, going back to that same example, is it fair that your people are searching on Google, buying Apple, buying goods from Amazon, but they can't invest in its upside? Is it fair that the elite of these countries somehow find a way to take out their money and buy these same assets, but the common man can't? What does a politician say at that point in time? Right. So that's how we've been able to kind of effectuate change by saying, look, there are safe and healthy and sustainable ways for the common person to be able to participate in this.
Wow. Okay. And for you personally, what's your vision for Fasset now, looking forward?
I would say that, we want to be the place that offers kind of real world assets in an accessible way. We want to be a place where it's secure. There's trust between the assets that we provide, the security that we provide, the ability for us to create a safe space for people to invest, not just today, not just tomorrow, but generationally. And this is it's a momentous task, right? Because you're replacing hundreds of 100-year-old banks. You're going into countries where the infrastructure doesn't exist, but you're putting in kind of the infrastructure, the new age infrastructure for people to be able to access upside from wherever they live, and that means a lot to us.
That's amazing. And I think now I want to touch on a little bit on your personal journey as a founder. What was the one thing you struggled the most in the early days?
A lot. There's a lot of things, right?
That's normal.
As I love to say, there's 99 reasons why you're going to fail.
Yeah.
And there's only one reason that on any given day that you're going to succeed.
Oh, lovely.
So you got to kind of look past those 99 things and kind of grasp onto that one thing and just continue, because there's just an assortment. We're in the early days of technology. It's like when Jeff Bezos went out to his early investors saying, I want to do Amazon. I want to create a marketplace for books, and people are like, what's the internet? Right? And that's kind of how I felt in the early days. But there's also talent. Dubai is a hub for sure, but it's not the same growing up where I grew up in LA, San Francisco, where people are born to take risk. People are born to join a startup. People are born to be curious, right? Over here, and understandably so, people want security in their job. They don't want to lose their job because they have to go back home. These are challenges to a startup who wants to be aggressive, right? Who wants to grow fast, who has to make quick decisions. So that cultural clash is something that we're just continuing to learn about.
So why did you pick Dubai?
Ultimately, even though I'm from the US predominantly, my heart is with the people from this part of the world, because it's just, when you grow up with this level of privilege that I've had, but still having let's say the remnants of the cultures that I come from, you feel like you got to give back, or you feel like you got to support others to have that same opportunity that I did. So our mission is always the same, like, can we democratize access to opportunity? What you do with that opportunity is up to you, but everyone growing up anywhere should have access to equal opportunity. And I think what Dubai does so well is that it's within 4 hours of 2 billion people, right? So we're able to kind of really create a market that we call, once again, from Morocco to Malaysia, and say, you know what, we want to kind of build a singular experience for these markets and kind of connect it to the world.
How did you come up with Morocco to Malaysia?
Looking at a map. But I think it simplifies our area of the global south that we're focused on.
Okay.
If you think of Morocco to Malaysia, there are some underlying common denominators. There's an underlying heritage of kind of Islamic values in these markets. there's an underlying heritage of common cultural characteristics around gold, as an example. These markets historically were part of the Silk Road, so there's a tie there. The Dubai in this context has always been a trade hub connecting, the Moroccan side to the Malaysian side. And we felt that, we're kind of the modern platform for what has been happening for thousands of years between these two markets.
That's amazing. And you've been in Dubai for how long now?
7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
Do you see Dubai as forever home?
It's a good question. What is home in today's context?
Oh, no.
I mean, that's a podcast for another day. But Dubai is a means to our end goal, which is to kind of create opportunities in this part of the world. But for me, home is like nostalgia.
Yeah.
Home is where you grew up, and there's nothing you can do to take that out of you. Right.
Yeah. And even now, I feel like, so I grew up in Mauritius.
Okay.
And my parents are still there. But even when you go, I just feel like it's a very different experience now. If I were to live there, I don't think it will be as pleasant. As
You know what? A good friend of mine and a mentor to me, he always says that, Raafi, when you go back to LA, you won't like it because you know too much. Because I'm sure this happens to you when you go back to Mauritius. You'll come with all this experience and all these different people you met in Dubai, and you've learned so much about different cultures. And you go back to I go back to LA, even though it's like a multicultural place in and of itself, but people don't know. Right. They don't know what it's like on the streets of Indonesia or in the streets of Sharjah.
Yeah.
Right. Even though they might be from these countries. Right. But that's a different culture of itself.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good question. But in general, do you think Dubai still has space for more founders and budding entrepreneurs to come?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think, if you look at any kind of report, growth is no longer happening in Europe. Growth is not happening in prominent economies like Japan. It's not happening as it used to in America. Where's real upside and growth going to come from? It's going to come from Africa and Asia. And what city is better prepared for that change in Dubai?
Yeah.
One thing that I can tell you is that, Dubai is like the new London. So what made London so special in the past? I'm from, my family's from London. London was special because, you could be in a place like Knightsbridge or in East London, wherever it may be, and you'd be meeting people from around the world. And it was a hub. But today, I think Dubai is even beyond what London used to be because it's more accessible. You have, Emirates Airlines. You have this extremely efficient airport. People are coming in due to conflict. People are coming in due to economic opportunity. People are coming in for all sorts of reasons. And when one wants to solve problems that affect a great portion of this world, where do you go? Right? I mean, leave aside is Dubai number one, but where else do you go?
Yeah.
Right? Where can you have a comfortable life that's safe, that's secure, but that has a growth mindset and that supports growth and that supports connectivity to places in Africa and places in Asia. No other place.
I know. Yeah. And I mean, London feels like the ghetto now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
When was the last time you were in London?
I was just there 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So I go to London quite a bit still. I mean, there's a charm. There's a charm.
Course.
That charm will hopefully never go away.
Yeah.
But can I do work from there? No way. And I meet friends there all the time saying that, Raafi, I got to start spending 2 weeks a month in Dubai. That's where the action's at. Yeah.
I feel like every time I go or every time I speak to my friends who are there, everyone is just a little bit depressed about the state of affairs.
The famous stat we used to have, there are more people from the UK in Dubai than there are in Manchester. Yeah, that's a fun fact for you that we used to say.
What?
When I was in government. Yeah. So there are more British people here than in Manchester.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense, to be honest. Yeah. They are everywhere. But no, that's true. And I feel like you're right. Dubai, especially with the convenience that there is here, it's so easy to assimilate
100%.
When you come as someone who does not live here. And the great thing, which I loved, was that there's no majority. So everyone feels at home immediately. You don't look different because everyone else is different
it's true.
as well.
It's true.
And that for me was very obvious because the first time I went to the UK, I was 18 and I went to university. And I was the only girl in my class. I was the only girl of color in my class.
Insane.
So then suddenly you start to notice, well, I am different to other people.
Do you have a community from the Mauritius over here as well?
I have some people.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of Mauritians here.
Okay.
But I
Okay.
don't know a lot of them.
Okay.
But yeah, we you do hear
Everybody has their people here. That's another thing about Dubai.
everyone
Yeah,
has their
yeah.
people.
Everyone has their restaurant of choice from back home.
Oh, we don't have a
You don't
Mauritian
have one.
restaurant.
Well, that's your next.
No.
That's your next gig. That's your next gig.
Yeah, I should do that. But no, I think that's great. And I guess I have a few questions for you as well now. The first one being, we'll get back to the money chat, is what's the best advice you've ever gotten when it comes to money?
Start early, start small.
And what's the worst one you've got?
Buy a house
Really?
as your first investment. Yeah, yeah.
You think that's bad advice?
I think that's outdated advice now. Because if you're trying to save up to buy a house, you're not looking at your finances in the right way in this era that we live in. Especially, I mean, if you live in Dubai, you know, right? Prices have skyrocketed. Salaries have not. So you got to look at an alternative strategy to get there. Of course, you should buy a house, but maybe that's not the first part of your strategy when you're saving.
I remember I saw this clip of Venus Williams where she said that buying a house is the worst thing you can do. And she was like,
Because you're locked in as well.
Yeah.
Right? Because I mean, if you're in Dubai, wherever you may be actually at this point in time, you want to be mobile. You want to have the freedom to experience a different culture. You maybe get a job in a different place. So, you know, house is very contextual now. It's no longer a blanket investment advice that Sheen buy a house.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's an investment myth that you've heard?
Don't buy Bitcoin.
Okay. And also, what was something you used to value before you had your change in mindset when it comes to money, and now you think that that's useless?
A master's degree. Spending on education. Yeah.
Really?
I mean, it comes at a significant opportunity cost. Yeah. Time and money. So you
The
graduate.
best years of your life as well.
Best years of your life. So you graduate 2 years and tens of thousands of dollars, or getting that career experience right away and starting that ladder right away.
But you know, that's interesting because also now, because I teach, right, I'm in touch with a lot of students and they all complain because whenever they're applying for any job, people want experience, like work experience, but then they can't get the work experience because they're the youngest of the youngest who are applying. So then it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle of we want people with experience, but we're not willing to give experience. But do you take interns, for example?
We do.
Oh, you
And
do?
I'll tell you, we have an intern right now
Okay.
who messaged me on LinkedIn, and he put a great message together. He had a great profile in the sense that I could see, I can feel the passion jumping off the screen. Somehow, you know, I forwarded his CV to our HR. Lo and behold, I saw him in the office, and I was just there last week, and it's been 2-3 months that he's been there, and people are like, this guy's amazing, right? And honestly, I mean, I'll be honest, he's become one of the top most important people in the organization. Why? Because he's hungry, he's curious, he's passionate. It's all it takes.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think it's a two-way street, right? Obviously, employers need to be open, but also people who need these things need to work a bit harder to proving that they want this is what they want. Because nowadays everything is competitive.
That's right. but I mean, I think the work hard is, you know, be passionate about something.
Yeah.
And go out there and pursue it.
And I think also we tend to become very impatient with results.
True.
So you know, I remember,
instant gratification.
Oh my goodness! So one thing I do is also I coach people who do podcasts, and someone told me, oh, you know, I did 10 episodes and nothing happened, so I gave up. I was like, you did 10 episodes and you gave up? Like the first time I went viral, I think was after 50 episodes, and there's that famous story of Walt Disney. Did you know that his Mickey Mouse business plan got rejected more than 300 times by investors?
No way.
More than 300 times, and he kept going. And I was like, even I would have given up at this point.
So I was attending a conference in New York on the sidelines of the UN last week, and there's a very famous boxing heavyweight champion named Vladimir Klitschko, and they asked him on stage, "What is leadership?" And you know, he's a PhD now. He's a heavyweight boxing champion of the world. He was known to fight late into his career, into his 40s, and still win. And so they asked him, what is leadership? And he just had one word: endurance. He got off the stage and I asked him, what do you mean by that? You know, you said leadership is endurance. What do you mean by endurance? And he told me, keep throwing punches. And I was like, wow. Makes a lot of sense.
That's very good
Yeah.
advice. So I feel like it's true, right? People always say resilience and endurance is the main way. But how do you deal with, for example, it's really nice to think, yeah, you keep throwing punches, but when something is not landing, how do you keep yourself going through that?
I'm a big Kobe Bryant fan, and he says this really well. He's like, when you win, you come back home, you go to sleep, you wake up, and you start over again. When you lose, you come back home, you go to sleep, and you start over again. So what does that mean? Similar to what Vladimir said, keep going on. Keep going on.
Well, as Dory said from Finding Nemo, keep
True.
swimming.
That's it.
Okay, well, Raafi, this has been amazing. What's your final advice you have for anybody listening today who still hasn't invested their money? What advice would you have?
Start yesterday. Start small. Skip a coffee for a day.
Amazing. And all the details for Fasset will be in the description box below as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.